Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, December 1st, 2025, and today we are discussing cover crops as a mulch, fill dirt concerns, and we'll also tack on a little feedback Monday per tradition of missing Fridays. So let's do it. All right, happy Monday, everyone, and also happy December. I obviously am still missing my voice a little bit, but it feels okay. It just doesn't want to come out of my mouth. Anyway, welcome to December. I'm a fan of December and the myriad of things that my family celebrates this month, but not such a fan of December for the fact that there is no dang sunlight here. It is just dark as soon as it can be. Nothing grows. It is the pause button of growing months while the Southern Hemisphere bogarts all the sunshine and warmth. In December, I get a little restless, not going to lie, but the little one and I converted our wash pack shed to a mini soccer facility this weekend, so that should help us as our season is mostly done until March. We'll still sell a little bit of lettuce through the winter and a few other things, but we won't be back in full farming mode until the spring. So yeah, I hope everyone had a nice break last week to finish out our November, and I also hope you all enjoyed that show that we did with Noah of Wild East Farm on Friday. Great feedback on that show. If you missed it, I know it would have been perhaps a bit more exciting to shoot on a farm versus a hotel room, but it was very fun to get to chat with Noah in person. Love that guy, super clear and thoughtful. Also really love that farm and what they're doing, and greatly appreciate how much they are willing to share about their business and the numbers and all that stuff. So if you missed it, go back and check it out. Oh, and before we move on, don't forget to always feel free to get your 20-second farm video clips in to Farmer Mike at no-tillgrowers.com. Love those. You all rock. All right, so we're going to keep rolling with our mulch series for the month of December because, frankly, I have a lot more to say still. Now, I wanted to talk a bit about cover crops as mulches today. This actually could be a couple segments, so this one will focus mostly on rye, but maybe I'll do more later on cover crops like Sudan grass and others that you could potentially use. I know I've sort of done this topic at some point in bits and pieces, but the more that I think about it, the more that I can add. And also, of course, like always, I find new research or new angles, so let's do that. The first thing I will say is that using cover crops as a weed suppressant, especially in a wet climate, is less functional than using cover crops as a moisture retainer in soil where the weeds are already really well suppressed. Or put more simply, cover crop mulches are amazing in soils that already don't have a lot of weed pressure. A rye cover crop over winter, in other words, can do a great job at retaining moisture, keeping the soil in place, and maybe even do a small amount of weed suppression, but they are not going to work against weeds like, an added mulch will, at least not on their own. Indeed, because I know some of you are wondering, cereal rye does have some effective allelopathic qualities in the roots that can help suppress weeds and weed germination while it grows. Some species like purslane and pigweed can be more inhibited than others, like lamb's quarters is kind of 50-50. According to some research, velvet leaf appears to not care at all about our cute little rye planting, though the sass was added by me, not the researchers. It will suppress some. It's just, rye and mulch from cover crop it's just not a miracle worker. How it works, though, is that first, the more biomass it creates above ground, the plant itself, obviously the better it will mulch. So there's that. But also, it immobilizes nitrogen in the making of that biomass so that other plants can't use it. The tall plant itself cools the soil, right? It's just shady under there. So that reduces the ability for certain weeds to germinate and or grow. Then, of course, as crops like rye grow, it produces some allelopathic compounds that can help inhibit weeds, though this is really a hard thing to study, according to studies, and is generally more effective while the rye is alive, as these chemicals do not last long in the soil after the rye is terminated. Anyway, some percentage of the efficacy will depend on the variety of cereal rye, but perhaps a bigger determining factor for any mulching cover crop is the quality of the soil it goes into. Like, it needs water and nitrogen, the same water and nitrogen it hopes to steal from your weeds, to really do its thing and then become a nice thick mulch. As the saying goes, treat your cover crops like a cash crop for the best results. This is definitely true when it comes to mulching. I've tried mulching with other cover crops, but as an actual mulch, rye is probably the best because it's somewhat thin, making it easier to plant into. like once it's terminated, than say sorghum Sudan grass, which is pretty thick and fibrous. Cereal rye lasts as well, unlike say like peas and oats, which tend to break down rather quickly in the spring unless planted, late in the fall. As your soil improves and you reduce the presence of weeds and increase the biomass of rye, the mulching effect will improve. Until then, though, you may need to consider supplementary mulches like compost, straw, hay in some circumstances, or grass clippings on a smaller scale. Sprinkling something like that right over top of, your rye after it's dead to just give it a little bit more oomph, the mulching effect. Anyway, I can say more, but I'll defer to your questions before returning to this topic for Feedback Friday. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Fill Dirt. It's not a person's name. It's just it could be a hard name for somebody to live with. But anyway, BRB.
Hey Jesse, Damian from Rancho Rodarte here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, looking at the last vestige of our daikon radish cover crop, holding on into the first frosts of the season, securely fenced off from all of these guys. I don't think so, buddy.
Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership. All right, back to the show.
If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Yao King, who asks, quote, "Hi, Jesse. I had some ditches in my land and asked my arborist to bring in some dirt. 3 triaxles later, it was filled and leveled. That's when the problem started. I was told it was clean fill, but I started finding contamination. A roll of landscape fabric, a hubcap, beer bottles/cans, hoses, concrete pieces, and broken tiles. I was told later it might have come from a bridge embankment project. Most of the big pieces of garbage were packed out by hand, but I'm sure there'll be small pieces left. What would you be concerned about in that scenario, and what would you do? My thoughts go to microplastics, but maybe there are other concerns. Is there a good test for contaminants, or even a way to treat soil for microplastics, or should I consider removing the soil altogether? My plan was to grow food to eat in the area, but I'm hesitant to do that now," end quote. Okay, so great question here. Fill dirt is complicated because, to be honest with you, if you get fill dirt from an old pasture that someone has sold to some developer or whatever, which we just have to stop doing that. There is plenty of developed space in the world already in most areas. But anyway, in that situation, you might actually score some pretty good soil. But it sounds like in this case, you did not so much score. So the bridge embankment element is interesting because that could mean a lot of different things, right? Was there a waterway there? Was it a bridge over a road? What, was the industry in that area? If you know which bridge, in other words, that might be helpful. If there was a waterway there, that could be where some of this trash came into the picture from a flood or something like that. There will almost certainly be contaminants like microplastics, but you might also have, some rich silt mixed in there from the water. So that could be nice. If it came from a roadway, then oil and microplastics from tires are likely in there. The degree to which that's a problem is a big question mark. It just depends on the amount of traffic and all those things, or how long it was there. You can get a soil test for things like heavy metals, which may or may not be an issue here, through your extension office. And I would also talk to them about where to get a test for things like motor oil. Tests for things like motor oil can be quite expensive, but your extension office may have some ideas of where you can obtain a test for an affordable price locally, or maybe even free. As for the microplastics, it's probably the same story. Check with your extension first. Maybe they know someone at the university studying this issue and who may be interested in obtaining a sample from you. Or you can look for research on microplastics and soil contamination and literally track down the authors who wrote those papers, see if they have any suggestions for labs or if they're interested in a sample. That said, in terms of, contamination, microplastics is the one I would not be the most concerned with, I guess, myself, though you might be able to literally see some of the tiny plastic in there, and by simply breaking the soil into a cup of water and looking for shards of plastic. Generally speaking, there is not a great way for the average person to test for microplastics, or a lot of chemical contaminants for that matter. And the tests may be pretty expensive, even if you find them. Microplastics, for their part, are unfortunately everywhere now and getting worse until it gets better. That, however, is going to take massive government intervention to slow down. In general, plants will do a lot of the work for you. So if you're concerned with potential chemicals, consider remediating that soil with plants like sunflowers and grains. But most plants will do that job, is my understanding. Grow that crop, cut it down, and remove it. Then start the gardens. Again, no easy answers here, but I hope something in there was helpful. Otherwise, we're going to take one more quick break. And when we return, we will Feedback Monday this thing. Be right back.
Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. Farmers who partnered with Farmhand say they grew an average of 63% this year because it's more than software. Farmhand is your business coach and assistant, helping to sell out, save time, and grow smarter with real data from real farms, shaping websites that convert, campaigns that sell, and fulfillment systems that run smoothly. Curious what that looks like? Meet the founder, Ari, at farmhand.partners/no-till and see the same insights and support the fastest growing farms rely on every week. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. Today's episode is also brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud supporter of Growers Daily. At Johnny's, they do more than sell seeds. They grow them. They trial them to see how they perform on Johnny's research farm in Maine and across the US and Canada. Only the best varieties are added to their catalog and website. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seedling to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. JohnnySeeds.com. That's JohnnySeeds.com. All right, back to the show.
All right, it is Monday after we didn't have a typical show on Friday, which means Feedback Monday, where we explore what you all were saying about last week's topics. Last Monday, we made our own mulching compost, simplified garden tracking, and discussed CSA pros and cons. On the mulching compost side, at Philaflam wrote, quote, I drive around neighborhoods like some creep looking for bags of fallen hardwood leaves in the fall that I make a large pile with and layer chicken bedding and manure in to let sit for the fall. Where I live, Spokane, Washington, Zone 6B. The leaves will freeze and thaw several times before next spring, rupturing the cell walls and leaving a light, fluffy mulching compost by the next spring. This year's pile is about 30-yard waste bags full of leaves and mini buckets of chicken bedding and manure, along with kitchen waste and the end of this year's garden materials like pepper plants and tomato, end quote. Thanks, that's great. I love that. That's a lot of material. Awesome. Now, one note, it isn't likely the cell wall thing. That would require a lot of internal moisture, and once those cell walls break, that it doesn't like reabsorb the moisture. It just largely dissipates once the leaves are kind of on the ground, or at least like shortly thereafter. However, it may be the type of leaves that you have, the bedding that you're using, and or the conditions there in Spokane, making it more conducive to decomposition, but definitely cool either way. Leaf creeps unite. Solidarity. Last Tuesday, we talked about using the penetrometer, hay, and trash, not all together. You can use them individually. Anyway, on the hay front, at Nomada Elizabeth wrote, quote, hi, do you have experience with spent/old/molding hay? I've heard some people give it away freely. Does it work similarly to hay? Thanks, end quote. Great question. And so there are no issues, like using moldy hay in terms of like how it may harm plants or anything like that. That is very unlikely. The challenge with moldy hay is just that it's really hard to work with because it tends to be, hard to break apart because it's like molded together. And if it's dry, you may want to wear a mask if you're working with it, just so you're not breathing in all those spores and dust and all the things. So on a small scale, it's totally fine. On a larger scale, what I would do, especially if you can get it for free, is get absolutely as much of it together as possible. Break each of the bales apart as much as you can into a giant pile, and then just add absolutely as much moisture as you can, and then throw like a cover over top of it and just turn that into a mulching compost. It's obviously already a kind of like breaking down. Why not go for it? So short answer, totally. Use it if you can, especially if you can get it for free. At Ashley Campbell wrote, quote, on a smaller scale, you can let your chickens have a couple days with the hay to greatly reduce the seeds in it, end quote. Thanks. And yes, you can definitely do this to an extent. We did it for years. I loved running the chickens where we would use hay, but they won't get all the seeds. So that's something that you do have to keep in mind. It's not a perfect option, but it can definitely help. So if you can incorporate chickens, by all means do that. And plus, free manure. On the trash story that day that I shared, which if you missed it, you should go back and listen to because it's wild. But at Tim A. Foreman wrote, quote, "Fun fact, the Brits call illegal dumping fly tipping. When I moved to London, I lived across from a lot with a no fly tipping sign and realized my American English had not equipped me for this. Like, are you not supposed to tip the flies for their service? Or it's like cow tipping, but for flies?" End quote. And I just like that for the image of cow tipping, but for flies. But also because it is a weirdly big problem in the UK, this fly tipping thing. That said, I do kind of believe that we have to start living in a world where we regularly have to be face to face with our excesses, or we are going to live in a world caused by our excesses. Last Wednesday, we went live and we talked about a whole range of things, including why I probably won't write another book anytime soon, tree roots, voles and moles invading gardens, and more. After the fact, at Wendy Eames asked, quote, "You've talked about farmer loneliness before. I've been fascinated by the history of granges and wonder if small grower grange could help with something like that," end quote. Okay, so awesome, interesting question. Granges on their own could make for a fascinating topic, but they were kind of this late 1800s fixture in America of, like in agrarian life, especially out in the Western U.S., that acted essentially as meeting places for farmers. They were perhaps somewhat like unions where farmers would gather to discuss primarily economic issues and, the general needs of farmers. These granges, however, at least the ones that had physical places, also served as meeting spaces where ideas could be shared, events could be held. So they were somewhat between like a farmer union and a potluck. I do like the idea of agricultural areas or farmers in general having meeting spaces like that. Although there are some granges today, as far as I can tell, most don't serve the same function that they used to. To me, this gathering of farmers and facilitation of the sharing of information and farmer needs is the role of local ag organizations. Having a dedicated physical space would be amazing, especially for farmer loneliness, but probably a bit costly. Community centers, though, have a ton of value, and I'd love to see more of those pop up. Loneliness, to me, is really important with farmers because it is such an isolated business, but it is probably best addressed through business design. In other words, I don't recommend moving to the middle of nowhere by yourself to start a small farm, generally speaking, even though that's where most of the farmland is. Build people, family, etc. into that business plan. I think the cost of physical space is partly why some of the granges that still exist are co-ops that sell feed and such and share the profit with the members. So not exactly the same thing as their original design, but maybe the offshoot of that is that we have co-ops now. So that's something. Anyway, good question and worth a deeper dive later. Last Thursday, we took off for Turkey Sandwich Day Eve. Then on Friday, we had the great Noah East of Wild East Farm on. Really, really positive feedback in the comments on that one. I was really happy to see that. Like I said at the top of this episode, at Strawberry Fun Time wrote, quote, "Love interviews. Can you feature more people who got started without family land in the Northeast states? Sometimes I listen to podcasts and I realize how people get profitable quickly is that they didn't have to pay a lease and then save up to own. Would love different perspectives, especially as young people without connections like that may be tuning in," end quote. Thanks. And I'm sure we've had people like that on at least one of our podcasts that fits that description. But yeah, there are plenty of farmers who start without land and inheritance, but the timeline into profitability is determined by everything from the startup capital that they saved before they got started, to the market they're in, to just their ability to focus on the business side, to just dumb luck. They got good soil, but more interviews from the north and all over for sure. Anyway, thank you as always for your awesome comments, but I think we are done for this Monday. Don't forget to No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear while I get a drink of water. Shouts to Water, too. Good stuff, Water. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work, and you should do that soon if you want it as a gift for the holidays. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in this month of December, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to Hall Cottage and Miriam Blackman. Two good novelistic names, even though I think Hall Cottage is probably the name of a thing and not a person, but Hall Cottage would make an awesome novel name. Anyway, in this week's story, our protagonist, let's call her Madeline, is an aging actress, and as an aging actress is just struggling to find work, as they often do. But she's made a good name for herself over her career, and she set herself up pretty well financially, thankfully. Theaters are not doing great at this point in time, and execs are hiring fewer and fewer people altogether because AI is doing much of the work, and she thinks is also contributing to the decline in theater goers. Because, I mean, who wants to watch these movies that are just made by stuff? But anyway, she feels in that way that there is still a strong desire for real humans doing real things, so she decides to create a one-person show, but for anywhere, to be acted out in any movie theater in the country. What happens next? That is for tomorrow on the One Woman Army. Is that already the name of something? Probably. It's probably better than this, but we'll find out. Thanks for watching and/or listening. We'll see you tomorrow.